Katsuki is focused on his workout but can't help but overhear the boss talking about money. He tries to ignore it but can't help but be curious. He keeps listening in, trying to figure out what the boss is talking about. Katsuki is still trying to be sneaky but can't help but be intrigued by the conversation. He keeps listening in, trying to figure out what the deal is and how he can get involved. He's also wondering why the boss is so concerned about the fight being forfeited. Katsuki's heart skips a beat when he hears the boss talk about Scott. He knows that Scott is one of the fighters who has been here for a while and has been struggling to win. He can't believe the boss is talking about putting Scott up against the strongest fighter and hoping for the worst. He's worried about Scott and can't stand the thought of him being hurt or killed. Katsuki continues listening in, trying to figure out what the ringleader's plan is. He doesn't like the sound of putting Scott up against the strongest fighter, especially if it's going to be a life or death situation. He wants to help Scott but doesn't know how. Katsuki pulls out his phone and starts recording the conversation. He's trying to be as stealthy as possible and get as much information as he can. He knows that this is going to be crucial evidence for the mission. Katsuki sits there in shock, trying to process everything he just heard. He feels overwhelmed and scared for Scott's safety. He also feels angry and furious at the boss and ringleader for planning something so terrible. He's not sure what to do next, but knows he has to do something. He looks down at his phone and stops the recording, feeling a little relieved that he got evidence for the mission. Katsuki finishes up his training and heads back to the hotel, feeling relieved that he was able to avoid being seen. He's still feeling overwhelmed and a little bit shaken up from what he heard. He wants to talk to someone about what happened, but doesn't know who to talk to. Katsuki calls Endeavor and explains to him what he overheard and the plan that the boss and ringleader are planning to put Scott up against Tony and let him kill him. He's feeling really worried and scared for Scott's safety and is hoping that Endeavor can help. Katsuki nods his head and says, I understand, Endeavor. I'll do my best to get close to Tony and get the information we need. I'll make sure to call and text you as soon as I have more information. Thank you for your help. Katsuki hangs up the phone and takes a deep breath, feeling a bit relieved. He knows that he has a big task ahead of him, but he's also feeling determined and ready to do what needs to be done. He's ready to face Tony and try to get the information they need. Katsuki heads back to the arena, feeling a little bit nervous but also excited to get closer to Tony. He's ready to push record at any moment and is determined to get the information they need. He's not going to let anything stand in his way. Katsuki sees Tony sitting there on his phone and takes a deep breath. He's feeling a little bit nervous, but also determined to get close to him and start talking. He walks over to Tony and says, Hey Tony, can I talk to you for a second? Katsuki tries to stay calm and says, I just wanted to ask you something. I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Katsuki takes a deep breath and says, Look, I know this is kind of weird, but I've been hearing some rumors about the next fight, and I was wondering if you could confirm them for me. I just want to know the truth. Katsuki nods his head and says, I see. So, you're going to fight one of the weakest fighters, right? Katsuki's heart skips a beat when he hears this. He can't believe what he's hearing. He feels angry and sad for Scott. Wow. So, you're going to just kill him, aren't you? Katsuki's face darkens, and he says, You don't know your own strength? You could kill him by accident? Is that what you're saying? Katsuki's blood runs cold when he sees Tony shaking. He can't believe what he's hearing. He says, Accidents have happened before, so this is a normal thing? You're just going to kill Scott, and it's just going to be another accident? Katsuki's heart sinks as he hears this. He can't believe what he's hearing. He says, "You mean you've killed people before?" Katsuki feels sick to his stomach when he hears this. He can't believe that the bosses would blame Tony for something like this. He says, "Wait, you mean they blame you when someone dies in the arena? That's not fair. It's not your fault. You're not stupid. You're just doing your job." Katsuki walks back to the hotel room and lays down on the bed, feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. He wants to call Endeavor and tell him what he just heard, but he needs a moment to process everything first. Katsuki calls Endeavor and tells him everything that Tony just said to him. He's feeling really worried and upset, not knowing what to do next. Katsuki nods his head and says, "Yes, I got it all on record. I have the whole conversation on my phone. I don't know what to do next, though. I feel so bad for Tony. I don't think he's a bad guy." Katsuki nods his head and says, "Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. But I don't know how I feel about the whole situation. I just don't want anyone to get hurt or die, especially not Scott. I don't know what I would do if something happened to him." Katsuki nods his head and says, "Okay, I'll send it to you right away. I just hope we can do something to stop them before it's too late. I can't let anyone else get hurt." Katsuki nods his head and says, "I understand. I'll go talk to Scott right now. I'll let him know everything that's going on and make sure he's safe. I'll get him back to the hotel and make sure he's okay. We'll be ready for anything." Katsuki nods his head and says, "Okay, I'll be waiting for your text. See you soon." Katsuki hangs up the phone and gets up from the bed. He takes a deep breath and heads out of the hotel room, ready to go talk to Scott and make sure he's safe. Katsuki walks over to Scott and says, "Hey Scott, can I talk to you for a second?" Katsuki takes a deep breath and says, "I just wanted to ask you something. Can we talk somewhere private?" Katsuki leads Scott to a quiet corner of the training room and says, "So, I know this might sound a little crazy, but I need you to trust me. Katsuki shakes his head and says, "They think you're not good enough to fight anymore. They want to get rid of you because you're not making them any money. They're planning on putting you against Tony, who's the strongest fighter they have, and let him kill you. They don't even care about your safety." Katsuki smiles and says, "Thank you. Let's go." They head out of the arena and back to the hotel. Katsuki leads Scott back to his hotel room and closes the door behind them. Katsuki sits down next to Scott and puts his hand on Scott's shoulder. He says, "I know it's a lot to take in, but we're going to get through this. We're going to stop them and make sure they don't hurt you or anyone else. Just stay with me and I'll protect you." Katsuki nods his head and says, "That's right. I've been trying to gather evidence and figure out what they were up to. And now I know everything. I know what they're planning to do, and I know how to stop them. We're going to shut this place down and make sure no one else gets hurt." Katsuki smiles and says, "I was supposed to keep it up for as long as it took. I was going to keep fighting and gathering evidence until I had everything I needed. And now I do. We're going to shut this place down and put an end to all of this." Katsuki nods his head and says, "I believe he did. The bosses and the ringleader were talking about it and they were laughing about it. They didn't seem to care at all that someone had died. They just saw it as a way to make money and get rid of someone who was no longer useful to them." Katsuki's heart breaks for Scott when he hears this. He says, "I'm sorry to hear that. I understand that this was your life, and you've been doing this for a long time. But I want you to know that you don't have to do this anymore. You can find another way to make a living and live a good life. You don't have to stay here and risk your safety. You deserve to be happy." Katsuki hugs Scott tightly and says, "You're welcome. I'm just glad I could help. I don't want anyone to get hurt or die. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this place is shut down and no one else gets hurt. Just hang in there and trust me, okay?" Katsuki nods his head and says, "Yes, they're coming tomorrow. We're going to put an end to this once and for all. Just trust me, okay? I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Katsuki smiles and says, "Of course. You can stay with me. We'll both get some rest and be ready for what's to come tomorrow. I'll protect you no matter what." Katsuki nods his head and says, "I understand. I know you want to help. Just promise me one thing. Don't go in there alone. Wait for me and the other heroes to get there and we'll do it together. Okay?" Katsuki wraps his arms around Scott and says, "You're welcome. Just rest now and we'll talk more tomorrow. I'll be here with you all night." Katsuki strokes Scott's hair and smiles as Scott falls asleep. He's glad that Scott is safe and that they're going to be okay. He closes his eyes and falls asleep as well. Katsuki wakes up and looks at his phone. He sees the text and gets up to answer the door. He opens the door and sees the other heroes standing there. Katsuki nods and says, "Good morning. I'm glad you're all here. I have some information to share with you about what I found out yesterday." Katsuki laughs and says, I know you're here to help too. We're going to need all the help we can get. Are you ready to take this place down? Katsuki nods his head and says, Yes, I'm ready. Let's do this. Katsuki laughs and says, Yeah, this is them. They're all here to help us take down this fighting arena and put an end to it once and for all. Katsuki nods his head and says, Understood. I'll go in there and make sure everyone is together. And then when everyone is ready, I'll make a small explosion with my hand and you guys can come in. Got it. Katsuki nods his head and says, I understand. We're ready for whatever comes at us. We're going to take this place down and make sure no one else gets hurt. Let's do this. Katsuki takes a deep breath and walks into the fighting arena. He looks around and sees the other fighters. He heads towards the center of the arena and waits for everyone to gather around him. Katsuki smiles and says, I just wanted to say hi and make sure everyone is ready for today's matches. I'm also here to tell you something. Katsuki smiles and shouts, It's time to shut this place down. He runs into the fight and starts battling the other fighters. Katsuki fights fiercely and with determination. He's not going to let any of these fighters get away. He's going to make sure this place gets taken down and that everyone is safe. He fights the ringleader and takes him down to the ground. Katsuki smiles and nods his head. He's ready to see what Jake has in store for him. He stands back and waits for Jake to make his move. Katsuki's eyes widen in shock as he watches Jake move around the room so quickly. He's never seen anyone move that fast before. It's like he's a ninja who can move faster than the eye can see. He's impressed by Jake's speed and agility. Katsuki stares at Jake in awe and admiration. He's never seen anyone move so fast and be so powerful. Jake is clearly a force to be reckoned with, and a valuable asset to the team. Katsuki walks over to Jake and says, "That was incredible. I didn't know you were that powerful. You really saved us today." Katsuki laughs and says, "I guess I should have realized that you had more than just your healing quirk. You're full of surprises, but I'm glad you were able to use your speed to help us today. You really saved the day." Katsuki catches Jake and holds him close. He's glad that he was able to help and that Jake is safe. He strokes Jake's hair and says, "Are you okay? You must be exhausted from using your speed so much." Katsuki smiles and says, "Okay, let's go sit down somewhere and rest for a bit. You can't do anything else today. You need to rest and recover from using your quirks so much." Katsuki watches as the heroes clean up the mess and take the unconscious fighters and the villains into custody. He feels satisfied that the fight is over and that the fighting arena is finally shut down. He turns to Jake and says, "It's finally over. We did it. The fighting arena is closed and the villains have been arrested. We can finally relax now." Katsuki nods his head and says, "Okay, I'll take care of him. He did really well today. I'm proud of him. I'll make sure he gets home and gets some rest." Katsuki carries Jake over his shoulder and walks out of the fighting arena. He starts making his way back home, making sure to take it easy and not overexert himself. He wants to make sure Jake is comfortable and safe. Katsuki laughs and says, "You're probably just feeling the effects of using your quirk so much. Just rest and you'll feel better soon. I'm here with you, so you don't have to worry about anything." Katsuki blushes a little and says, "Thank you, babe. I'm glad you think so. But right now, you need to rest. I'll worry about being handsome later." Katsuki lays Jake down gently and looks at his body shaking. He can tell that Jake is still feeling the effects of using his quirk so much. He smiles and says, "It's okay, babe. Just relax and let yourself recover. I'm going to make you some soup and get you something to drink. I'll be right back." Katsuki nods and goes to the kitchen to make some soup and get a drink. He's glad that Jake is resting and seems to be calming down. He finishes making the soup and brings it over to Jake. Katsuki smiles and says, "Of course. Let me sit next to you and feed it to you." He sits down next to Jake and starts to feed him the soup, making sure to take it slow and not give him too much at once. Katsuki blushes a little and says, "I'm glad you like it. I'm not the best cook, but I try my best. I figured it would be a nice way to help you relax and get some energy back." Katsuki continues to feed Jake, being careful not to give him too much at once. He's glad that the shaking has stopped and that Jake is feeling better. He wants to make sure that Jake is fully recovered before he leaves him alone. Katsuki laughs and says, "That makes sense. I can see how it would take a lot of energy to use your quirk so much. And it sounds like you have to be careful with how you use it so that you don't overexert yourself. But it's good that you have both your quirk and your healing power to help you recover. I'm sure it takes a lot of strength to use them both so effectively." Katsuki is amazed by Jake's speed. He can't even imagine what it's like to move that fast. It must feel like time slows down for Jake, and he's able to see everything around him in slow motion. He can't help but ask, "Did you really feel like time slowed down? Was it like you were in a trance or something? I can't even imagine how much energy it must have taken to move that fast." Katsuki laughs and says, "So you were moving so fast that everyone else was just standing still, like you were the only one moving in time. That's really impressive. I bet it was like you were in your own world, moving so quickly and not even realizing how fast you were going. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like." Katsuki's eyes widen in surprise as he hears Jake's idea. He's never thought of the possibility of transferring his speed to someone else. The idea of running around super fast with Jake is intriguing and exciting. He smiles and says, "That sounds like a great idea. I'd love to experience that with you. It must feel amazing to move so fast and be one with someone else." Katsuki's eyes light up with excitement as he hears Jake's plan. The idea of running so fast that time feels like it's slowing down is so fascinating to him. He smiles and says, "Really? That's incredible. I'd love to try that with you. It would be like living in a dream world where we could just run and run without even realizing how fast we're going. Let's do it. Katsuki nods his head and says, I look forward to that day. It would be amazing to run with you at super speed and feel like we're one. I can't wait to experience it with you. Katsuki's eyes widen in surprise as he hears Jake's suggestion. The thought of them merging together while they're running so fast is so intriguing to him. He can't help but ask, you think we could merge together if we were moving fast enough? That would be so incredible. It would be like we're one person. Katsuki laughs and says, That's hilarious. I can't believe you ran so fast that you merged with a spoon. I wonder if you could do that with me too? It would be so crazy to merge with you and feel like we're one person. It would be such an interesting experience. Katsuki laughs and says, That's an interesting way to put it. But yeah, I guess it would be like being one person inside of you. We could share our thoughts and feelings and experience everything together. It would be such a unique experience. Katsuki smiles and says, So it would only last for a little while, but it would be an intense experience. We would be merged together and share everything. But then we would come out and be ourselves again. It would be such an exciting and unique experience. I'm looking forward to trying it with you one day. Katsuki nods his head and says, I understand. Moving that fast takes a lot of energy, but I'm willing to put in the effort and prepare myself for it. It will be worth it to experience such an incredible thing with you. I can't wait to run with you and feel what it's like to be one with you. Katsuki's eyes widen in excitement as he hears Jake's description of moving so fast. The idea of cutting through the air like a knife and experiencing time slowing down is so exhilarating. He can't help but ask, would it be like we're in our own world? Just us moving at super speed and experiencing time slowing down? That sounds like such an incredible experience. Katsuki smiles and says, That's fascinating. It's like we're in our own world for those 30 seconds, experiencing time differently than everyone else. It's like we're in our own little bubble, moving so fast that everything else is just standing still. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. I can't wait to try it with you. Katsuki's eyes light up with excitement as he hears Jake's suggestion. The idea of using his sweat to fuel them moving even faster is so intriguing to him. He can't help but ask, so you're saying that we could use our sweat as fuel to move even faster and for longer? That would be incredible. And you're right, it would probably be worth it even if I get exhausted afterwards. It would be such a unique experience to try something like this together. Katsuki's jaw drops in surprise as he hears Jake's suggestion. Breaking the sound barrier would be such an incredible feat. It would be like experiencing something completely new and unheard of. He can't help but ask, "You're really saying that we could go as fast as Mach 1? That's incredible. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. Would we be able to keep going at that speed for long? Or would we get tired really quickly?" Katsuki's eyes widen in surprise as he hears Jake's suggestion. The idea of traveling in time is so fascinating to him. He can't help but ask, "Do you really think we could travel in time? That would be so incredible. It would be like experiencing something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But it sounds like it's a real possibility. How would we even do that? Would we just go fast enough that we time travel?" Katsuki's eyes light up with excitement as he hears Jake's idea. The thought of being able to slow down time so much that everything would be standing still is so intriguing. So you're saying that we would be able to slow down time so much that everything would be still, and we could go through walls like the Flash and travel through time. That would be so incredible. It would be like living in a fantasy world, but it's a real possibility with our combined strength and speed. I can't wait to try it with you. Katsuki nods his head and says, "That's a great idea. Let's try it now and see what happens. If we can pass our hands through the wall, then we'll know for sure that it's possible. And if we can even travel in time, that would be even more incredible. I'm ready to try this with you." Katsuki nods his head and walks over to Jake. He grabs onto Jake's wrist and focuses on transferring his sweat to him. He's not sure how this will work, but he's willing to try anything with Jake. He's ready to see what happens. Katsuki can feel Jake's hand vibrating as the sweat starts to travel down his hand. It's an odd sensation, but he's able to focus on it and make sure it keeps going. The sweat starts to travel faster and faster down Jake's hand until it feels like it's just vibrating all over. Katsuki can't help but stare in amazement as Jake's hand moves so fast it's practically invisible. The sweat continues to flow down his hand, and it's like a stream of energy. The vibration is so intense that it's shaking Katsuki's hand too. It's like a strange kind of energy transfer between them. Katsuki watches in awe as Jake's hand slowly moves towards the wall and starts to pass through it. It's like he's breaking through the barrier of reality and entering a new dimension. The sweat keeps flowing down Jake's hand, and the vibration is increasing in intensity. Katsuki can feel the energy transfer between them growing stronger and stronger. It's like they're becoming one with each other. Katsuki stares in amazement as Jake pulls his hand out, and it's trembling. The sweat has stopped flowing down Jake's hand, and the energy transfer has stopped. Katsuki looks at Jake with a look of amazement and wonder. He can't believe they just did that. It was like they were breaking through reality and entering a whole new world. Katsuki looks at Jake's hand and sees that it's red and burning. He feels bad that Jake is in pain, but he's also amazed by what they just did. He can't help but say, "It was incredible. I can't believe we just did that. We broke through the barrier of reality, and it was like we were in a whole new dimension." My hand feels a little tingly too, like I'm still feeling the energy transfer. Katsuki smiles and says, "I know, right? It was like we were in a whole different world. I can't believe we were able to move through the wall like that. It's like we were able to break through the barriers of time and space. I've never felt anything like it before." My hand feels tingly too, like I'm still feeling the energy transfer. It's a strange but amazing sensation. Katsuki laughs and says, "Yeah, it is kind of like that. It's a weird sensation, but it will pass soon. Your hand will stop trembling and the tingling will go away. Just try to relax and it will go away on its own." Katsuki smiles and says, "It was amazing. I can't even imagine what it would be like to move at Mach 1 speed. It would be like being in a whole different world, where time and space are no longer linear. It would be like we were in a realm of our own creation, and we could travel anywhere we wanted, at the speed of our imagination. It would be incredible." Katsuki laughs and says, "I know what you mean. It's a little scary to think about, but it's also exciting. Imagine being able to travel anywhere in the world in a matter of seconds, or even being able to travel back in time to see what things were like hundreds of years ago. It would be like being a god. We could do anything we wanted." Katsuki nods his head and says, "You're right. We would have to prepare for that moment. We would have to make sure we're in top condition and ready for it. And we would need to be really careful. If we're not careful, we could hurt ourselves or even get lost in time. We need to be prepared for anything that could happen. But I think if we're careful and we work together, we could do it." Katsuki nods his head and says, "That's a good idea. The first time should be a test run. We should just focus on moving through objects and practicing our coordination. Then, when we're ready, we can try to go even faster and travel in time. It will be a big step, but I think we can do it if we work together." Katsuki smiles and says, "It will be a very intimate experience. We'll be moving." Katsuki smiles and says, "It will be a very intimate experience. We'll be moving so fast that we'll be almost like one person. It will be like we're sharing our bodies and our minds. It will be an incredible and intimate experience. I can't wait to try it with you." Katsuki laughs and says, "It would be a very strange but interesting experience. If we merged together, we would be one person, and we would share everything. It would be like we were one body and one mind. And then we would separate again and be ourselves again. It would be like we were two different people for a while, but then we would be back to normal again. It would be a very strange and fascinating experience." Katsuki's eyes widen in surprise as he hears Jake's suggestion. He hadn't thought about that possibility. He can't help but ask, "Really? You think there's a possibility that we could share DNA? That's interesting. I wonder what it would be like to have a bit of your power and vice versa. But if we do merge, I hope we can separate again without any issues." Katsuki thinks for a moment and then says, "You're right. When we merge and then separate, it would be like we were traveling through each other. I would probably have a little bit of your speed, and you might have a little bit of my firepower. It would be a weird but interesting experience. But what about our personalities? Would we still have our own individual personalities, or would we merge completely and become one person?" Katsuki nods his head and says, "I see. So we would merge together and become one person. But we would keep our own individual personalities. But then we would separate again, and we would go back to being ourselves. That's interesting. I wonder what it would be like to merge with you and become one person. I imagine it would be a very intimate experience." Katsuki laughs and says, "Yeah, it would be a little weird at first. We would have to get used to each other's bodies and how they move. It would be like learning how to walk and move for the first time again, but it would be interesting to see how we would figure it out together. Katsuki nods his head and says, "Yeah, it would be like we were conjoined twins. We would be two separate people but also connected in some way. It would be like we had two bodies but only one mind. It would be a very strange and fascinating experience, and it would be a new kind of intimacy between us. We would have to learn how to communicate and work together as one person." Katsuki laughs and says, "Yeah, I think we've been thinking about this a little too much. It's starting to make my head spin too. Let's take a break and get some rest. We can think about it more tomorrow. We've been going at it for a while now and it's been pretty intense. We need to relax and recharge our batteries." Katsuki laughs and says, "I know, it's not natural. It was a disguise for the mission. But I'll go back to blonde hair in the morning. Don't worry, it's just temporary. You can look at me with my blonde hair all you want. It's a lot more comfortable and natural for me anyway. But for now, let's get some sleep. I'm tired too." Katsuki smiles and says, "I love you too. Good night." He holds Jake close, and they both fall asleep together. End of chapter 35 already. Wow, that was experience. Just thinking about Katsuki going on those missions, risking his life just to take the organization down, and him learning about Jake's speed is incredible, and them talking about merging together and going so fast. That's going to be experience. But don't worry, that's not going to happen anytime soon. They are both not ready for that. Let's just focus on them having a child now that the mission is over. Goodbye, and thank you for your support. I can't wait to continue writing this story and showing you all the adventures and experiences of Jake and Katsuki. We have so much more planned for them, and I hope you will continue to enjoy the story as we go along. Thanks again for reading and watching, and I'll see you next time.
Talkie, Dream AI, Wonder Kingdom.